It's that time of year. It is time for the creepy crawlies and the spiders and the skeletons and the witches and the pumpkins. So in this video, I'm going to share 9 complete tutorials of fun and creepy things that you can sew for Halloween. Here is a sampling. Fabric pumpkins, or how to make them in a jiffy with fabric over a toilet paper roll. That one is a great one to do with kids, with scouts, with church groups, etc. I'm going to show you how to make a stuffed ghost, or how to use starch and do no-sew ghosts that you can hang from fish line and put them in your living room. They're super easy and also super fun. How to make a drawstring bag that is the perfect size for a candy bar. Also how to make a trick-or-treat bag that's perfect for lots of candy bars. Of course, the witch hats. You can put it on a headband. You can put it as a decoration, use it for your table, and more. So I'm very excited to put all this stuff together for you in one video so you don't have to wander all over the place. So grab your favorite scissors and let's get sewing for Halloween. Ghosts are taking over the internet, have you noticed? And today I want to share this no-sew, cute little fabric scrap ghost made with a piece of fabric, some Google eyes or felt eyes, and liquid starch. It is so easy to do. I did a few tests, and now I'm going to show you some different things to consider as you are making these. And if anyone is allergic to latex in your house, you are in luck because I can't touch balloons, so I will not be using balloons to make the curve shape on the head. But I came up with a few other solutions that obviously work. Now let's talk about forms. I cannot touch balloons, so I had to get really creative. So if you want to go balloon free, I found that these glass ornaments placed inside a small mason jar worked great for a 12 to 14 inch piece of fabric. So I just had the mason jar and the ball for the ghost that has the bottom that was touching. Then for the one that I wanted to look like he was floating, I just set that mason jar right on top of an upside down bowl. So just get creative and play with the height and how to just get things so that it's going to hang at the bottom the way that you want it to. I had to get more creative for the big one. And so what I did was I ran to the Dollar Tree and I found this terrarium planter. It's plastic, it's curved, and I was like, uh-oh, it has a hook. How am I going to do this? But luckily, you can just unscrew that and take it off. And then find a glass that you can put that on. So here's what I did. I took a cookie sheet and I put foil on top just to protect my workspace and so that I could move it. Then I took a glass bowl and I just poured some of this Stay Flow liquid starch. Now you'll see different opinions on whether you dilute it or not. I'm going full strength. I want these things nice and stiff and starchy. Now I have a 12-inch square of white fabric. I'm just going to dip it into that starch, get it nice and wet, and then you're just going to wring it out. Okay, put the starch aside. Now I'm going to put my form down, and then you're just going to put this centered over your ball, and then you're just going to let it drape down, and then just organize it however you want. So this one would kind of look like a ghost just kind of hanging out. If you want him to look like he's going into the wind or moving a little bit faster, you would just move your fabric, give it a little bit of shape, and that's it. We're just going to let that dry. So you just walk away from that. I often do these in the evening, and then by the morning, they're ready to go, and then we can put the eyes on them. Now let's make some faces. Eyes in a mouth, whatever you want. Now these ghosts are made out of my October Ghost fabric from Riley Blake Designs. It also comes with purple or a gray background. So you can use a printed Halloween fabric, maybe or some stripes or whatever, kind of make it fun. Or you can go more traditional and just use white. It just really depends what look you're going for, what scraps you're working with, and if you're doing it with other people, what they want. So maybe you give them some options. Then I got some googly eyes, also at the Dollar Tree, which I thought kind of fun, gives a different look. I put felt eyes and a mouth on the other side just to show you the difference. So that's a little more traditional. It's a little more fun. So I basically just took a scrap of black felt, figure out about how big you want it. So let's make some bigger eyes. And I'm just winging this. I just folded it in half and then just cut an oval. 2 pieces. If you're not thrilled with the shape, just trim that down. This is definitely, again, one of those projects you don't want to overthink. You just want to have fun with it. So you could do eyes and a mouth. You could just do the eyes. So much fun. And then you can either use a hot glue gun to put that on, or you could use an Elmer's glue So when I put these on, I put a little bit of glue on the back of the felt. I just put my hand in here and then just pressed, because it's hard to get it to stick well if you don't have anything behind there. So now that your ghosts have eyes, you can decide if they're just going to hang out on a bookshelf or if you want to hang them. Are you ready to have your ghosts take flight? If you don't want them on a counter and you want them to fly around your house, just use some clear fishing line. I like to keep just a spool on hand for projects like this. And then I tied a button to the one end of the fishing line. You want to use white if you're doing a white ghost. I can put anything in that colored one because it's not going to show through. Then you're just going to pull more line than you think you're going to need for length. Then I'm just going to thread the fishing line through a needle. And now I'm just going to turn my ghost over and I'm going to poke that pin straight through the top of his cute little head. If you want to make sure it's secure, you could do just a tiny, tiny little stitch to make sure that it doesn't slip when you're moving it around. So see, when I let go, obviously gravity took that little button. So I'm just going to put an itty bitty stitch there that no one's going to see. That is nice and secure, and he is ready to fly around. And now one thing you really need to remember is you cannot hang these outside, because if they get wet, the starch is going to get wet, and then they will no longer have their ghost shape, and you'll be starting over, and you'll just look like you have a weird piece of fabric hanging outside. So definitely keep these indoor or at least under cover, if not inside. I'm not sure how humidity would affect them, but if you try it and find out, let me know.
In this video tutorial, I'm going to show you how quick and easy it is to make a reversible trick-or-treat bag in no time at all. You're going to need an exterior fabric and an interior fabric, or this could be your exterior, this could be your interior, because again, they're reversible, 16 inches square each. Then I like long handles, and I make them out of 2 pieces of 5-inch by 20-inch long fabric. Then you need your basics, rotary cutter, scissors. I'm going to use this little ruler to cut corners out to make boxed corners, another optional part of the bag that I will explain later. Clips or pins, a pencil, thread, rotary cutter, sewing machine, things like that. So let's get started. If you're using directional fabric like I am, you need to make sure that when you put your pieces right sides together, that the direction is the same. So the top is up here. You don't want to have it this way, where one half will be right side up and one half will be upside down. So just pay attention to that if you're using directional fabric. I'm going to assume that this is usually going to be the lining, even though this will be reversible. I'm going to put these together, right sides together. And then in the bottom corners, I'm going to draw a box that is 2 inches in each corner. This is one way to make boxed corners, which basically makes a bag that has a base to it and stands up on its own. You want this to be even faster. You can just make a flat bag. It will hold plenty of candy for your little trick-or-treaters or whatever you want. But I just like to give the bags a little bit more shape. So I have drawn these, and then I'm just going to cut these corners out. Then I'm just going to clip the sides. And since I'm treating this one as the lining, I'm also going to put 2 pins along the bottom so that I remember to leave this space open for turning. So we're going to sew down this side, just this section, then this section, and then up this side. I'm going to set that aside, grab my other fabric, and repeat the steps. Cutting out a 2-inch square is going to create a 4-inch flat bottom on your bag. So the bottom of the bag basically becomes twice the size of the square. So if you want your bottom to be smaller, you would just cut out a smaller square. And if you want it to be larger, you would just cut out a larger square. For the exterior fabric, you're going to sew down the one side, across the bottom and up the side, leaving these corners open because we're going to be using them to make the bottom. And as I said in the beginning, I'm showing you how to make a quick and easy trick-or-treat bag. You can take the concepts and the sizes, like the fabric sizes that I showed you, and make this as complicated as you want. You could do a quilted bag. You could add a border. So instead of cutting 2 16-inch squares from one fabric, you could maybe do a 3-inch border on the top. So you would basically create that 16-inch square from 2 different fabrics. You could add trim, you could applique, you could embroider names, so many fun things you could do. I would love to hear what your plans are. Are you going to keep it quick and easy, or are you going to do something a little bit more elaborate? Let me know in the comments. Now that we've sewed the side and the bottoms, we are going to press these seams open. They don't have to be pressed open perfectly, but it just makes it a little bit nicer of a finish. Now on the lining fabric, or the second fabric, if you're keeping this reversible, you are going to want to press this seam and press the unsewn part so that it is even. So I'm actually going to do this one a little bit different. Let's try it this way. I'm just going to press the one side. Now I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Now what pressing this does is it is going to have this open edge ready to sew closed. Now, if you really want this to be a perfect bottom and nobody's going to know which side you created as the inside or the outside, when you go to sew this together, you can just do it by hand. Since it is the bottom of a trick-or-treat bag, if you don't care, you can just sew really close to it with your sewing machine. So this is where we cut the corner out of our original squares. So you're just going to grab that where that corner is cut on each side of the bag. So pinch one, pinch another one, and just pull it straight out. The lines will go straight across. You're going to match the seams. Put a little clip in there. And if you want to put 2 more clips just to make sure that this stays lined up, that is not going to be a bad idea. And then we are just going to sew straight across 1/4 inch from that raw edge to make that boxed corner. And you're just going to repeat the process on the other side, and then also do the same thing for the lining. Now there's many ways to make handles. You could fold it in half, sew it, flip it, press it, but I want this handle to be a little bit more sturdy. I'm going to fold this in half. Now, if this was a printed fabric, you would be doing this wrong sides together. So the printed side would be out. Then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to fold and press each long edge into that first seam. So what this is going to do is it's going to take a 5-inch wide piece of fabric and turn it into a 1.5 inch wide handle that has 4 layers of fabric. So it's going to be nice and sturdy for the kids to grab and open and close and head out trick-or-treating. We do both of those, and then we are going to press this one more time. And if you want to, you can just throw a couple clips or pins on here to make sure it stays lined up correctly when we sew. So what we're going to do is you're going to sew down both long sides at about 1/8 inch from the edge, just to sew that closed. If you want to, you could even do a decorative stitch or something fun down the center if you just want to add a little more something to the bag. Moving right along, we have the outside fabric sewn together with the boxed corners. We have the lining with the opening for turning and our 2 straps. Now it is time to assemble. So what I like to do is take my lining fabric and turn that right side out. Just push out those corners. And then you want your seams on either side and match these raw edges along the top, and then line it up along a ruler or your rotary cutter mat. Now we are going to baste the handles onto the lining before assembling the entire bag. So I'm just going to measure over 4 inches from each side. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put a mark. Then I'm just going to fold it down so that I'm placing a mark at the same point on both sides of the bag. Now I'm going to take a handle. I'm going to make sure it's not twisted. Don't pin it so it's twisted. Make sure it's going to stay nice and flat. I'm going to take the raw edges. We didn't have to sew those. Center that on that mark and just clip or pin that in place. I'm going to turn the bag over and repeat on this side. And now we are just going to baste the handles on, sewing 1/8 inch from the edge so that the basting stitch won't show when we put the bag together. Our handles are basted on, and now it is time to put the 2 bags together. We're going to keep this piece inside out the way it is so that we can put the lining and the handles inside, and our fabrics will be right sides together. So you're going to put that in there, and then you're going to find one of the seams from the lining and match that up with the seam of the exterior fabric and clipped. Then flip it around, find the other seam, and clip that as well. Then I just simply stand it up and shake it. And you're just going to clip these raw edges together. They should be exactly the same size. Just make sure that your handles are laying flat. I would also love to know who you're going to make these for. Are you making them for your own kids, for your grandkids? This could be a great project to sew and sell for all those people that aren't sewers and crafty like you are, that want something a little bit more special and handmade. So let me know in the comments who you're making it for. You don't have to worry about how it's organized in here. You just need to make sure that this upper edge is lined up and clipped together. Because we left an opening in the lining for turning, we're going to sew all the way around the top, 1/4 inch from that edge. Now we need to turn the bag right side out. So you're going to find the opening that you left in the bottom of one of your fabrics or the lining fabric, and then you're just going to pull the whole thing through there. Now you'll notice, because we pressed this the way we did, you're going to be able to make that invisible if you were to hand stitch that closed, or if you don't mind an itty bitty bump, you can go like this and you can just stitch by machine really close. But we're not ready to do that yet. First, I'm going to lay the bag out. I'm going to have the handles going the same way, and I'm going to press where these two came together. That is going to make it easier for us to top stitch. So I'm going to now take the lining, and I'm going to push it inside the bag. And now what I need to do is I need to press this top edge so that this seam between the two colors is right on the edge. We don't want the inside showing on the outside. We don't want the outside showing on the inside, because again, we want this to be well done and reversible so that nobody is going to know which side was which when you were making it. I'm going to stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge so that I do catch that handle again and give it a little bit more support. Because we used a 1/4 inch seam, it doesn't hang down very far, so you want to make sure you are getting that in your top stitching. I also don't want an ugly knot on either side of the bag where I start and stop. So I am going to start and stop right around a side seam, but I am also going to pull up my bobbin thread, which means I'm going to put the foot down, I'm going to lower the needle, pull the needle back up while holding this thread. Now I can grab the bobbin thread, and when I get started, I can put both of these, I'm holding both of the threads back here, do a few stitches forward, a few stitches back, and that's going to knot that nicely. It's not going to have a big old bird's nest on the other side. If you are feeling witchy like I am and you are ready to get in a Halloweeny mood, then this is the video for you. It started with a trip to the Dollar Tree in search of headbands, because my original idea was I want to make a witch hat that goes on a headband. As I was making them, I came up with lots of other ideas for how and where you can use them for Halloween, in decor, on your table, etc. So let me show you how easy they are to make, show you some fun ways to embellish them, and then you can decide how you want to use your cute little witch hats for your Halloween. We're going to start where we always start, talking about the supplies that you need to make a cute witch hat. So the basics: sewing machine, iron, ironing board, thread that matches whatever fabric you're going to be using, rotary cutter, and ruler. So those are like your basics. Highly recommend pinking shears because we're going to have some curves to cut, and this is the easiest way to do that. I will explain why I love this method more later. You're going to need some polyfill stuffing or something to stuff the hat with. I'm going to be using this fabric tube turner to turn the witch hat band, but if you don't have that, you can do it without. So let's talk more about the hat band. For the hat band, you need 2 pieces of fabric that are 9 by 4, and if you purchase the pattern in my Etsy shop, you'll get this pattern, and you're basically going to be putting it on the fold and then cutting it. If you don't want to get the pattern, do the hat band out of probably a thick ribbon, because this is going to be a little bit harder to DIY. Then let's talk about the hat. You need a piece of fabric that is at least 8.5 inches by 9. This is a little bit taller, and you will fold it in half and you do that. Now this, I can tell you how to DIY. It is 8 inches high, and then down here, which is a 1/2 inch up, so at 7.5 inches, you want this to be 4 inches wide. So you could take a piece of paper, 8 inches by 4 inches, measure up a 1/2 inch, and then draw these diagonals, and then just cut a curve, and then you'll be able to do this. I did a few samples. I thought this was a good size to go with the size brim. So now let's talk about what we need for the brim. For the brim, you need 2 pieces of fabric. One will be the bottom, one will be the top, and then a piece of interfacing to give it some stability so that it's not super floppy, so that it kind of holds its shape. Now I tried a few things for that as well, and my favorite was a heat and bond fusible interfacing. I used the Craft Fusible Extra Firm. If you don't have that and you want to go get it, then go get it, especially if you're going to be making a lot of them. Otherwise, I always say often the best interfacing is the one you have in your stash, so feel free to wing it. I'm going to be using a fun scrap that has a little print on it for the top of the hat, and then just black for the back. Then in the pattern, there's a 6-inch circle template, or you can find something that's 6 inches to trace or make your own 6-inch circle. Or if you have one of these circle rulers, which I love, you can use that to cut as well. You can just carefully cut with your rotary blade. I'll show you how to do that in a second, because that's where we're going to start. Then you're going to need some pins, some clips, and there's a little bit of hand sewing, or you can do hot gluing. I burnt my fingers really bad, so now I'm a big fan of hand sewing these together while I watch TV. You need a point turner. Later on, I will talk about headband options if you want to turn your hat into a fascinator, and also some embellishment options, because you can make this as plain or as fancy as you want. Are you ready to get started? Let's start with the brim. Well, leave it to me to tell you all the supplies and then grab a new one. I'm going to be using my rotating self-healing cutting mat. If you don't have one, you can always spin your bigger mat on a table, or you can move your thing around, but I'm going to show you why I like to use this. I'm going to put my 2 brim fabrics right sides together. If one is a little bit bigger than the other one, put the smaller one on top, so you make sure you're getting a good circle on both. These need to be at least 6.25 inch square. I just had a scrap of the other that was a little bit bigger because the selvage is on there. So I'm going to show you how this circle ruler works and why I wanted the rotating cutting mat. So I'm going to hold my hand down flat so that it's not going to shift. I don't want it to spin. And I cut these in quarters. So you want to make sure that your blade is straight up and down. It's not tilted in any way. You want to make sure you're not nicking the edge of your circle. Tilting this to get it lined up, but then making sure it is straight before I start cutting. I'm going to go around as much as I can without hurting my wrist. And then I like to pivot it, because then I'm not moving the template or the fabric. I'm moving the board beneath it. And that's going to give me my best circle. And I usually cut off just so I can see if any little spots were missed. I can pull that off before I move to do the next section. So we have our 2 circles. We need them right sides together. And then we have the interfacing. Now I'm not going to cut that into a circle because it's a step that doesn't need to be done. These need to be cut, or I could have actually just cut one of them. But I usually cut both of the fabrics, and I leave this. This is a 6.5 inch square. And then I'm just going to clip on the 4 sides. Now the reason I'm not cutting this interfacing is because this is a full circle. So we're going to have to trim the entire thing with the pinking shears so that when we turn it right side out, it gives us a nice smooth circle. That will cut all of this excess off. So it saves a step, and it makes sure there's nothing that's going to slide and not be lined up. So this is ready. We're going to take that to the sewing machine in a minute, but first we're going to cut our other pieces. I'm going to prep all 3 sections before we head to the sewing machine. Now I'm going to take my black. If this had a print on it, you would want to fold it right sides together, but this is a solid, so it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to finger press that. Then I'm going to place this on the fold. Now you can cut this one of 2 ways. You can pin it and then cut it with scissors. I am just going to, again, rotate it, place a straight ruler down this side, Trim that line. Gently lift that so it doesn't move. If it moves, you can just line it back up. And then I'm going to hold this, keeping my fingers away from the edge, and I'm just going to use my rotary cutter and go along that edge. Now, I don't do that all the time, but we're not making clothes here. This isn't an exact science. If it isn't perfect to your curve that you've drawn or the template, it's okay. It is still going to work out. So now we have the hat piece, and we're going to be sewing this side. Now, let me show you what happens if you don't have a piece that's big enough to fold to use for your hat, but you really want to use it. So say we want to make the hat out of this print, but I didn't have a wide enough piece to fold it in half and do it that way. And this will work for any kind of pattern that you have that says to cut it on a fold. So obviously we can't cut it on a fold because it's 2 pieces. I'm going to put it right sides together first so I don't have to move it again. We're going to do this. And on the side that says fold, all you need to do is put your ruler, the 1/4 inch line, on the fold line. So you're cutting a 1/4 inch wider than your template on the fold side, because that gives you a seam allowance so that you can sew both sides. See how easy that is? Little cheat, especially when it's a straight thing. Then on this side and the bottom, we are going to continue to just go right along the edge of that template. So this hat will have 2 seams instead of 1 because we made it out of 2 pieces of fabric. Okay, we have the brim and the hat pieces cut. Let's do the hat band. And again, if you don't have the pattern, you can just use a piece of ribbon. Even if you have the pattern, you can use a piece of ribbon. I just wanted to give you a pattern so that you had a way to use any fabric that you wanted to. And now I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to cut this straight edge, and then it moved, obviously. I'm just going to line up the straight edge and the fold, and I'm just going to cut this with the rotary cutter. You can pin it and use scissors or just do this, but this is, again, why it's handy to have this thing that spins, or if you have a big enough table and you can spin your bigger mat, that works too. Okay, so that is one of the 2 band pieces. This one I did the same way. So I used a print, a stripe, and then I just put white on the back because nobody's ever going to see the white. So I'm going to show you how I did that. I know I'm using a solid. I could have easily done 2 pinks, but I want to show you this method of using your less expensive or your more abundant scraps. I'm going to place this on a piece of white scrap fabric. I'm going to make sure the white is going to be a little bit bigger than the pink. I'm just going to cut a rectangle. You put it on here so you can see it better. And the theory of doing this is the same as with the brim. We're going to have to trim both of these long curves with pinking shears, which will cut all of this off. So I will just pin this together, and we're going to be sewing. Everything is with 1/4 inch seams. So this is a fun project. Originally, as you saw in the beginning of the video, I had just planned to make a fascinator with it. And then as I started making them, I thought of other ways to use these hats, just as a decoration, as place cards for a fun Halloween luncheon or dinner party. So many different things that you can do. So let me know in the comments what you think you will do with them. So we have the hat band, the hat brim, and 2 hat cones ready to roll. So let's head to the sewing machine. For the hat band, I'm going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam around both curves and 1 short end. And because I have so much extra fabric, I'm going to just start off of the band. So any bird's nest that might happen will be on the part we're going to cut off. So I'll just hold that top thread and get going. Once you get onto it, you want to go backwards a little bit to secure the stitches. And for all of this curved stitching, you want to use a short stitch length. I'm using a 1.8 so that when we cut it and turn it, it's going to have a nice smooth curve. If you use longer stitches, your curve won't be quite as smooth. So the band is sewn. Put that aside, and now we're going to sew the hat points. This is a leader fabric. If you haven't heard me talk about them before, it is just a piece of scrap fabric, and I'm going to start sewing on this. So again, just like I started off of the hat band, any bird's nest situation, kind of not on the back, is going to be on the leader fabric and not on this fabric. But once you get onto your project, remember to go backwards and forwards so that you're securing those stitches. Now I'm just going to start sewing on the second hat cone that is going to have the 2 seams. Once you get that sewn, you're just going to cut that leader fabric off. and cut the hats apart. Now, before we press these hats, we need to trim these points. So for the one that I sewed both sides, I'm going to come up and down because there is not much room right here for fabric to be. So you want it to be trimmed pretty close to the stitching. But again, always making sure you don't cut any of the stitches that you put in there or your project will fall apart a little bit. This one, sorry, you can't see that stitching very well. We just have to cut once because this side is a fold. So you do not want to cut that. Now we have one more thing to sew, and that is the brim. And this one, we're going to use the short stitch length again. We're going to sew 1/4 inch from the edge of the circle. And try and leave as little as possible open for turning, because then you have to try and get it into a curve when you're folding it under and pressing it, which gets a little tricky. So there's 2 ways to do this. Now, what I've done before is I've left like a 2 to 3 inch opening, and then I have, trimmed and turned it and then had to tuck that under and get it into the curved shape, which it works okay, but I can always tell where it is. So this time I'm going to try something a little bit different. We're going to see how it works. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to go forward and back, and then we're going to go all the way around. So we started right here. Put the clip there so you can see it. So I want to end here because I need at least that much space to get this turned right side out. So I'm going to go backwards. And now here's what we're going to try together. Let's see if it works. I'm going to keep sewing, but I've started and stopped at these 2 spots. But I'm going to keep sewing because that is going to put a stitch line and basically dots in this fabric. And I think it's going to make it fold under better. We'll be picking this section out with the seam ripper. Just another way to do it, and let's see how it works. So I don't want to go all the way onto this because I want it to be easy to take that piece out. All right, so I don't know if this makes sense to you. So I finished here. I started here, you can tell by the string, but I still sewed here. And that is just to give the fabric an idea of where I want it to fold. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to instantly grab my seam ripper and I'm going to pull those stitches out. So I just pulled out that little section where we're going to turn it. So we have our initial sewing done. Let's head back to the workspace, do some trimming, turning, and stuffing. All our sewn pieces, we're going to grab our pinking shears and cut the brim and the curve on the hat band. I usually just do it over my trash so I don't end up with fuzz and little pieces potentially on my mat. It's just one less step for cleanup. And I'm just cutting really close, but not on the stitches. I'm cutting at an angle on those corners. Now, obviously, we don't need that white to be bigger than the pink. And because this is so small, I'm just going to cut it with scissors. You could use your rotary cutter and a ruler as well. So that one is cut. Now we're going to cut our circle. Now it's important to not cut on the fabric where it is open because we need that to have enough to turn under and sew together. So what I like to do is I always start where we ended. So this is where the end stitches are. So I'm going to start there and I'm going to go around until we get to the beginning. And I'm going again very close to the stitching, but not clipping the stitching. Now this is where we started and this is what's open for turning. So I'm going to go out here and you can go beyond the 1/4 inch seam allowance with the pinking shears. That's fine because you still have enough to turn under. So now we have some turning to do. Let's start with the hat points. I try and do as much of this with my fingers as possible. We already trimmed the tips when we were at the sewing machine because this is what you have the potential of pushing your turning tool through that point or through the fabric or through the stitching if you're a little overzealous. So I like to get it out as much as I can with my fingers, and then I will go back in and just very, very slowly and gently push that out. And this isn't going to go into a perfect point because you can see how tight that point is, and all that fabric, even though we trimmed it pretty close, is not going to fit in there. Okay, so that one's done. I'm going to turn this one as well. So those are both turned. Now, if you have tube turners, I'm using the 1/2 inch tube turner to turn this. Normally you think of these for straight strips of fabric, but this isn't super curved and it will work. And if you have the tool, you might as well use it, right? So I'm going to just plop that in there. Then you take the stick with the pointier end and you gently push the fabric into the tube and then take the tube off. Then you can use that point to gently push those corners out. And then as you take it out, just run that point along the outside curve. It doesn't work very well on that inside curve. We'll deal with that when we're ironing. But you can really get a head start on that outside curve by using that. Last thing is turning this brim right side out. Now, I'm going to admit, it's a little tricky because I try and do as small a hole as possible, and this is a little bit stiff. So what you want to do is you want to fold this down where the two seams are and get it folded back. See how it's folded down like that? You don't want to put a ton of strain on those stitches. So if you fold them down, you're going to have a lot less pressure on it. Then you just kind of pinch that together and pull it through. Kind of pulling down on that open edge and pulling up on the rest as you go. And then again, with your finger, just push along that circle. See what a nice curve we got? The better you cut your circle and the smaller stitches and the more precise you sew that circle, the better circle you're gonna have, obviously. So now we have the issue of having to turn this in. Oh my gosh, that stitching really helps. You didn't see me do all my samples, but I can tell you getting that pushed in and curved is working a lot easier because the fabric already kind of knows what we wanna do. They're like, all right, you already sewed on that line. Maybe that's where she wants us to fold. So let's get the iron set up. We'll do some ironing and then we will stuff those points. Always start pressing on the sewn side because that side is already out pretty well for us. And then you're just going to kind of roll with your fingers to push those seams out. Just start over here and move towards the open end. I usually stop about a 1/2 inch from the open end because we are going to tuck that raw edge in and press. Now, I had an idea as I was pressing that. It would be kind of fun to add people's names. Like if you're going to use this for a place setting, for some kind of a gift, or maybe you're making them for a classroom, you could use your Cricut and heat transfer vinyl. And after this is sewn together, you could just center and put names on here. Or if you wanted to use machine embroidery, I would do it ahead of time. You could do a decorative stitch down there, anything that you want. Leave a comment if you have some other ideas for things that you could put on here before you sew it onto the hat. Now we are going to press the circle, and kind of like the hat band, I always press the part that's sewn and that we already have out nicely. That is also going to be activating the fusing material in that interfacing. So when I'm doing this edge and pressing, I keep the part that has the interfacing on the bottom because that's easier to fold when you're kind of folding up and have it nicely secure on your ironing surface. So I'm just kind of finger pressing that. And then I'm going to fold the top fabric to match. Now we're going to sew around the edge of the brim about 1/8 inch so that we are closing the opening and just giving it a nice little finish. Now, because we're not starting off of the edge, we're not going to use a leader fabric. Instead, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread. If you haven't seen that before, you're just going to put your foot down. You're holding the top thread. Then you put the foot down while still holding that thread, and lift it back up. Give it a little yank. I know it's hard to see the black on the black. And then I'm going to grab tweezers and pull that thread up. Now I'm going to hold both the top and the bobbin thread, put them under the foot. I'm going to hold tight. I'm going to take a few stitches forward and then a few stitches back, still holding the threads. I usually let go of the threads after about 10 stitches to make sure nothing's going to get sucked back down under and create a knot or what we like to call a bird's nest. And now I'm just going to slowly sew all the way around the edge. And now I'm going to show you how to stuff these hats 2 different ways. So for this hat, it's just stuffed fully and it's straight. This one, I like how I put the little bends in it. So I'm going to show you how I accomplished that. We'll do this one straight. You just start with a really small piece because it needs to go up in that tip and just shove that up in there. And then as you go, you can take bigger pieces, but for that tip, you need it to be pretty small to begin with. And then you're just going to be pushing and filling that and making sure you like the shape. When you're happy with that, just keep adding it. And you're going to keep filling it until your filling is about 1 inch down from the edge of your hat. Okay, so that's good. See, about 1 inch. Now we're going to make the crooked hat. So we start the same way as with the first hat with a little piece of the fiber fill, and we push that into the tip. Then we're going to put our next piece of stuffing, but we're going to leave a little bit of airspace right here where we want that first bend to be. We're going to do 2 bends. So don't push it super tight, but we want to keep a little bit of air right there. So I'm going to squeeze that between my fingers so that I can still get that stuffing pretty tight, and just move it with your hands to get a feel for how you want it to be. So the first one will go like that. This one will go like that. If we put a pin there to stop us from pushing the stuffing too far in, that's going to be helpful, and then we can get it stuffed easier. Okay, so we're about 1 inch from the bottom. So now we're going to stitch that closed. So I put a piece of black thread on this needle, doubled it, put a knot at the end. Just work around, just some little stitches. I kind of fold it in because the goal is for this to be sort of circular. Oops. We don't want it to be super tightly sewn because it needs to be able to fill out. So we're just loosely closing this so that we're going to have an edge when we sew this top to the hat brim. And as I mentioned before, if you prefer, you can glue this. You see how now we have that base that we're going to be stitching onto the hat, but first we're going to do our little tucks to make that curved top. I'm going to do the second one first, and I'm just going to fold it until it's how I like it. So you can do it less or more. I like it like that. So I'm going to put the pin into the center of the fold so that the knot is in there, and then I'm just going to do, I don't know, 3 or 4 stitches to hold that down. So same thing again, just bend that how you want it to be. I'm going to have a much more pronounced bend at the top. Look how fun that is. So the next step is to place the hat in the center of the brim, and then you're just going to stitch all the way around to tack it onto the brim. Now that the hat is sewn onto the brim, we're going to put the hat band on. Now this band is designed to be a little bit big because some people will make this a little bit fatter, some people will make it skinnier. So we want to make sure it is big enough to meet or overlap. So what you're going to do is you're just going to wrap it around the bottom of the hat, put the open edge underneath, and then overlap the sewn edge as far as it needs to go, and then you're going to sew that shut. Now before I start stitching that, I line it up with the seam line of the hat. So I'm just going to really quickly stitch the band together. I'm not stitching it even to the hat. Leave me a comment and let me know what you think. How and where will you be making these hats, and how many do you think you will make? So now we have another cute little witch hat with a little crook, and it can be done. It can be done just like this, or we can add some stuff to it. We can add some embellishments. For example, this one you can see has all these pom-poms, and that is just a 8mm pom-pom fringe trim, they call it, because I wanted it to have lots of these little pom-pom balls. It didn't seem to have enough when I did it once, so I put 2 rows so that it's got lots and lots. But let's look at some other things we can do to embellish and make these a little bit fancier. Now let's talk about embellishments. While these hats are super cute, just the way they are, if you want to jazz them up and kind of throw the kitchen sink at them, you can do that too. So I have gathered some ideas. I got these at the Dollar Tree. These come with clips, so you can kind of clip them on the hat band, and then if you change your mind, you can take it off. You could have spiders kind of coming off the side of the hat. That's kind of fun too. Okay, in the bathroom, I want to show you how to get the hat on the headband exactly where you want it. So what you're going to do is first you're going to put your headband on. Got my sparkly one from the Dollar Tree. Then you're just going to take your hat, I need to fluff my hair a little bit more. You're going to take your hat and you're just going to move it around and decide where you love it on your headband. I think we'll do slightly crooked on the right. That's kind of fun. Now I'm going to just put my finger right where the center of the hat will be on the headband. Pull that off, and I'm just going to put a little clip on there. And that is how I will know where I want to sew this or glue this onto the headband to make something super cool. So you can see I have a wide variety of hats now. This one is just very simple, kind of Salem witch hat. This would be great for a table. I used a wavy rotary cutter and cut a 10-inch square just to give that orange accent between the big plate and the salad plate, and just put that cute hat on top. I think it makes for a fun Halloween table thing. You can put them around the house. You can hang them, put some fishing line in there and have them hang, just like the ghosts, do some starch ghosts. I'll have a link below the video for how to make the super easy starch ghosts. And then you could do ghosts and hats this year. And I'm sure there are more things we can do with them that I haven't thought of. So let me know in the comments if you have more ideas that you can share with me and the group, or just let me know what you're planning to do. So what do you think? What are you going to use your witch hats for? So get the written directions and the templates for the fabric hats in my Etsy shop. That link is also down below.
Let me show you how quick and easy it is to make a pumpkin decoration for fall with toilet paper, a stick or a cinnamon stick, and a fat quarter of fabric, and just a little scrap of twine or ribbon. I just grabbed what I had around, and this is about 10 inches long, and then some scissors. So you can use a fat quarter, or get a 1/4 inch of fabric and cut it in half, which is what I did here. And then you're gonna put it wrong side up. You're gonna put your toilet paper in the middle, and you're gonna unroll a little bit. Now the size of your pumpkin is gonna depend on the quality of your toilet paper. I bought this at a dollar store because I didn't want my more expensive toilet paper just hanging out in a fabric pumpkin all fall. So I went for inexpensive, and you're just going to unroll it a little bit and crunch it up. That helps it do the round shape a little bit better. Then I like to start with one of the shorter ends. You're gonna just put that inside the toilet paper roll, and you're just going to work your way around. You wanna make sure the cut edges go in, and then just kind of pull, let me move that, so you can see better. You're just gonna kind of pull it up and tuck it so that it's going to give you a fun puffed out shape like a pumpkin, because you don't want everyone to be like, oh, what a beautiful toilet paper roll you have in fabric with a stick in it. You want them to think you're extra, extra clever when it takes you like 2 minutes, if that, to do. All right, so you can adjust it, how it's, pulling or not pulling. And then all you do is you either take a stick, I got that from my yard, put that in the center, or you can do a cinnamon stick if you don't have sticks in your yard or you want something a little more fragrant. I'm gonna go with stick. And then I'm taking this 10-inch piece of ribbon and tying it around the stick. Well, I guess I could have done that before I put it in, it'd be easier. All right, tie that around the stick, put that in. I want them both going off the same edge, and then they're a little bit long, so I'm just going to fold it in half and give them kind of a fun, uneven apparently, pointed edge. I'll do that one a little bit better. And look at that. I have a pumpkin. What did that take me? Like a minute or two, and mostly because I was talking.
I am in love with this book, The Little Ghost Who Was a Quilt. Now, if you're a quilter, you may be aware of this book. If not, there's a link below. You can go find it on Amazon, but it is an adorable story about the struggles of the ghost who is a little bit different because instead of being a sheet, he was a quilt. Obviously, this speaks to the quilters in all of us, right? And I decided that this year I wanted to give this to my great nephew. He is 2.5. He's going to absolutely love it. And then came my dilemma. What kind of quilt do I make to go with this book? Now, I've seen lots of people online. They have basically taken the same pattern and done the blues and the whites and the grays. The artist in me loves that, right? Let's coordinate with the book. But then the great aunt in me wants to be the hero and wants him to absolutely love the quilt that I make him. So this is what I ended up making. Paw Patrol. Yep, I decided that a 2.5-year-old is not going to even realize that, this is matching and it's on purpose. He's just going to go bananas over his favorite characters on a quilt. I will be telling you a little bit more about using fabric like this. For example, spoiler alert, you cannot sell things in general with fabric that has TV characters or movie characters. You're going to see it. I know you're going to see it. You're going to see it at craft fairs. You're going to see it online, but it is not legal and it is not worth it. This is what I decided to do because I want to be the hero. Now, this is just a super simple quilt. It's a basic patchwork. If you have never quilted before, this is going to be super easy and perfect for you. And if you sign up for my newsletter, there's a link below this video, then you can get this pattern for free. And it walks through all the steps of how to do it. If you're already on my newsletter, just sign up again. It's not going to make you get 2 copies of newsletters. It's just going to send you this free pattern. So let me show you how to make this baby or toddler size patchwork quilt. And you can decide if you are going to do something that matches the book, or if you want to do something a little bit different that you know is really going to speak to the heart of whoever you're going to give the book. I'm going to sew sets of blocks together with a 1/4 inch seam, and then we will put these sets together to make the rows for our patchwork quilt. And I'm going to do what is called daisy chaining, which means we're not going to cut the thread. We're just going to get the next one ready, leave a few stitches in between so that we can use a cutter, which I'll show you in a minute, and then just go right on to the next one. And while my character fabric does have some directionality to it, I'm not going to worry about what direction I'm sewing it in for this quilt because it's for a 2.5-year-old. It's going to go every which way, and he is not going to care or even notice if everything is going the same direction from one side of the quilt. Now, I've talked about leader fabrics a lot, which is when you use just a little scrap of fabric to get started before you start. But you can also use the same fabric as an ender. And basically what that means is I don't feel like cutting this and then having to use a leader again and wasting a bit of thread. So I'm just going to sew onto this scrap of fabric. And I usually do it onto an angle. You want to make sure it's long enough that you'll be able to cut this one off the back, but not so long that you're wasting a lot of thread. I'm just going to do that, grab my scissors, cut that off. Now I'll be ready to come back and sew these sets together. But first, let me show you how I'm going to cut them apart. There's obviously 2 ways. The most obvious and one that everyone can do is just to use scissors and come in here and cut the thread in between each of these sets of blocks. But if you're doing a lot of quilting, and especially if you're doing smaller quilt blocks, that can become a bit time consuming. So I'm going to show you how this works. So this cute little bumblebee is a Busy Bee thread cutter from Lori Holt of Bee in My Bonnet. She's got lots of bee themed things. And it basically has this little opening and there's a little razor blade in there. Some people position it different ways. I just like to do it this way. So what this does is you just take your long string of fabrics, right, of your squares that you've sewn together, and then you want to make sure you have enough thread in the middle that you can just put it in here and it just hits that razor blade and it cuts apart. So it is a bit quicker and easier. Some people put it on the side of their sewing machine. I don't know, this is just what felt good to me. So if you've never tried one of these, you might like it. And there's lots of different versions of this. Some of them will stand up on the table and you'll just kind of push down to cut. This one has adhesive on the back so it can just stick right to your sewing machine. You'll never have to look for it when you need it. Now we're going to head to the ironing board and talk about pressing these seams. So when you are sewing blocks together, these are just a lot of 5-inch squares, you want to be careful about how your seams are so that they're not super bulky in one area and not in another. So let me show you behind the scenes. Now you'll notice that on the blue blocks, the seams are going this way, and on the green, they're going this way. And that is very, very intentional. That is so that when you sew them together, you have what is called a nested seam, where the 2 layers of fabric are going one way on one side and the other way on the other side, thereby spreading that bulk. If all 4 were going on the same side, you'd have a lot of bulk on one side and barely any on this side. This way, each side has basically 4 pieces or 4 layers of fabric. So to do that, with this quilt pattern, it's pretty easy because we have the one print that's going to be every other block, and then in every other row, there's going to be a solid color, either green or blue. So when you are pressing, you always want to press your seams so that they go over the solid color. That way they will always be in the opposite direction, and when you sew your rows together, you'll have beautifully nested seams. To do that really efficiently, you want to have whichever color you want to fold over. So the green, so that this is pressed towards the green, you want to put on top. Now we're going to set the seam, which means to iron over that before we ever fold it. I use my quilter's clapper. That will take some of the moisture and heat out of that fabric and make it nice and flat. Now you can see the difference, because at first this seems like a silly step, but you can see this one the seam hasn't been set, and you can see a little bit of wobble in that fabric, and you can see those stitches are wobbling a little bit. You can see how that is from the edge. Once you've set that seam, everything is nice and flat, and even from the side, nice and flat. See that difference? So it's a simple step, but it makes a big difference, especially in quilting. So once you set that seam, I'm just going to push this forward, just kind of finger press that again, hit it with my clapper one more time, and we have a beautifully pressed seam. Now I'm going to set and press the rest of these. So there I've been doing one at a time. If you want to do more than one at a time, you can, and I often do. Then I just set them up like this. I'll put the seams so they're next to each other, and then I can do two at a time. I always do the right one first because I'm right-handed, and then as I'm pressing this left one, I can be using the clapper on the right one. But when you're doing flipping, you really want to just do one at a time. But setting the seams, you can be more efficient if you set more than one seam at a time. Now that we're back to the sewing machine, this ender fabric magically became a leader fabric. So we're going to leave that on there. We're going to put these print to solid, and we're going to be sewing 2 pairs together to start building this green row. Now I'm just going to use scissors to clip that back one off and clip that scrap fabric off. And because this row is going to end with a green, I'm just going to press this after I sew another one on. It will be far enough away. And so I'm going to add that final green piece that will be for the row. Use that ender again. This is still stuck a little bit under the foot, so I'm just going to lift the foot so I can pivot it, cut that off. Apparently I really don't like starting and ending threads, and I like to be as efficient as possible when I do that. Okay, so now I'm going to add this one too. So I'm going to be setting and pressing about 4 or 5 seams at the same time. Just keeps me from bouncing back and forth quite as often between the machine and the ironing board. When we just did the pairs, I set and pressed all of these seams individually. But now I have put the whole row together, and you can see it has a nicely pressed seam there and there, but all the rest in between need to be done. And you can tell from the back whether they have been pressed or not. So I'm just going to start and then set and flip things as I go. What is really, really important for you to know and understand is this. Let's look at the legal warning here. And this may be an unpopular opinion among many people, because I definitely see this heatedly debated on social media. But here's the legality of it. And I'm not a lawyer, but I have licensed my art for over 21 years, so I do understand copyrights and how this works. Always defer to the selvage. Don't believe what a girl on Facebook tells you and says, no, it's fine if you're selling less than 50 or however many, you can totally sell it. No, you cannot. This says, sold for non-commercial, home use only. That means if I make these, I cannot sell them. No money can be exchanged. I can show you how to make them. I can give this to my nephew, my great nephew, as a gift, but I cannot make these, sell these on Etsy, sell these at craft fairs, etc., etc. Now, does that mean people don't do it? Does that mean a lot of them don't get caught? But if they get caught, I can guarantee you that Paw Patrol Company has a lot more money for lawyers than you do. So it's bad karma, and it is just too much of a risk, in my opinion, to take. So I wanted to make sure that was super, super clear, since this is one of the few times that I am going to be using licensed fabric that is not my own fabric. So now that we have all of the strips sewn together, and we have the seams going in the opposite direction, always going towards the solid color and not the print, it is time to clip and sew the rows together. Now, the reason this is important that these go in the opposite direction is, as I said before, so that we have nested seams. And that means that when we put the two fabrics together, right sides together, and we line up the seam lines like that, and clip them, we have half the seams going this way and half the seams going this way. That reduces bulk. The other way you could do it would be to iron all of your seams open like that, but to me that takes a little bit more time, and this is just an easier way, and you're going to end up with the same amount of fabric on each side regardless of which way you prefer to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this one over, make sure it is flat, and make sure the seams are sitting in the direction they're supposed to be going, and then we're going to put this row on top. And then I just do a preliminary lining up in the very beginning. This is what I am most concerned about, is where these seams are. So you want this seam line to match with this one like that. And so you're going to be looking at that at every seam. You also want to make sure it's going straight and that this end is done correctly. Now there are three main ways to clip this together, pin this together before you take it to the sewing machine and sew it. Regular straight pins, fabric clips, or this is called a magic pin. You can see it's actually two pins at once and it is slightly bent. And this is designed specifically for nested seams and quilting. This is going to give you your most accurate hold. It's going to hold these things really, really well, and it's going to keep everything from shifting better than a single pin or a clip. I use these when I need things to be super, super precise. So what you do is you just take it and you put one pin on each side of that seam line. You press it in and then you pull it back out. So it works like that. A pin I usually do at a little bit of an angle, and I angle it towards the direction my needle is going to come. So I start this way and I put it up. And that is because as you sew, you're going to be able to get closer to where that pin is before having to take it out. If you go straight, you can't get quite as close with your needle. Now the clips, this is the fastest way, and honestly the way I do it a lot. It might slip a little bit. It doesn't hold it quite as tightly as a pin does. But what I do with the clips is I just put it right on that seam. So pluses and minuses to each. For a project like this that is for a young child that I'm just trying to get done really quickly, I'm probably going to defer to fabric clips. But I wanted to show you these three different options and how they work. So we'll just leave those in for now. Now, another thing that I do that's a little bit different than some people is I also put a clip or a pin up here and over. So we're going to be sewing here with a 1/4 inch seam. But I like to do that just to keep this from slipping sideways or shifting a little bit when I've moved it. And I do this at both ends. So I'm just going to go along and I'm going to make sure these seams are matched, and I'm just going to use clips for the rest. Also making sure that my seams are going in the opposite directions. If somehow you ironed one the wrong way, you can just take it back to the iron, flatten it back out and fix it, because you just really want to make sure that these are nested so it doesn't create a weird bump in your quilt. And now we're at the other end. And so I'm going to clip here or pin. That'll actually keep it from moving even more than the clip. And now we're ready to take it to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Then we'll come back and we'll press that. We'll set the seam and press it just like we did with these individual squares. It will just be a really long row. Now I'm sewing this strip together with a 1/4 inch seam just like I did each of the blocks. You want to stop your sewing machine before taking any clips or pins off. If you try and do it while sewing, you are most likely going to do a little bit of a jiggle and not have as straight of a line, especially when you are newer. Now, when you have the fabric that is going like this, you want to make sure your foot doesn't push it and make it twisted. So what I do is I take the tip of my scissors and I hold that down until it gets under the foot, keeps my finger away from the needle, and it just makes sure everything is going to stay straight and lined up. Now, when we get to this nested seam, the thing you need to pay attention to is the top one is down, so super easy, don't have to do anything. But you need to make sure that the one underneath is staying in the direction it's supposed to. Sometimes this little bump on where your machine meets the needle plate will cause it to flip. And if you keep your finger here, you can usually feel that that has happened. So then you just pause, stick your finger or your scissors under there and make sure that is flat before you go over that seam. And if you are newer to quilting, here's a couple other little tips to get that 1/4 inch seam to stay consistent. First, I recommend getting a 1/4 inch foot for your sewing machine. You're just gonna look and see what kind of foot your brand makes. It is very dependent on your brand of sewing machine. So this is a 1/4 inch foot, so that needle is a 1/4 inch from the edge. So I just need to keep the fabric lined up with the edge of the foot. You can also use your needle plate. So this line here is the 1/4 inch mark. So I can be making sure my fabric is going there, and along the foot. You can also use a seam guide that will stick magnetically to your needle plate and give you an even better visual. Or you can grab some washi tape or painter's tape and tape further along to give yourself a good guide. So now these two are ready. I'm just going to take them to the ironing board, set this very long seam, press it open, and repeat the process until all of the rows are together and the quilt topper is done. And this is my favorite type of gift: a book, instill the love of reading into a child, and then also a quilt that will wrap them up in my love, even though this little cutie lives on the opposite side of the country. So let me know in the comments if you're going to give it a try, who you might be giving this book and a quilt to, or just a quilt. You don't have to include the book. If you're new here, my name is Tara Reed. I'm an artist and a fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs, and I love to teach easy sewing projects, quilting, sewing, sew and sell, and more. So be sure to subscribe to my channel for lots of fun projects and tutorials. Hit that bell so that YouTube lets you know when I post something new. Leave a comment, leave me a thumbs up. Love to hear what you think. And also, if you have any suggestions of things that you'd love to see me do in the future, leave that in the comments as well. Have a fantastic day. Happy sewing or happy quilting.
In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to whip up these super cute and scrappy Mummy Baby Bibs with towels on the back. When you sew it together, it's going to look like this, but then you put it through the wash and it frays and it looks amazingly mummified. Before we dive into the tutorial, I want to show you a couple different stages. So this is what the bib looks like right after you sew it. So you're going to sew not too close to the edges so that there's room for fraying. And this one, I just got out of the wash. Look at how it just looks like used gauze. Now, just to warn you, there will be some bigger sections. So you're just going to cut those off, and it is better than I anticipated. It's also very important to pre-wash your fabric and pre-wash the towel that you use on the back, because as you know, bibs go through the laundry a lot. So you want to make sure everything's pre-shrunk, and then you're just going to run it through again to get this fun frayed edge on the mummy eyes and the mummy gauze. Let's start by talking about what we need for this sweet little Mummy Baby Bib. The first thing you need is white fabric. I'm going to be working from a 1/4 yard. I won't need all of it. You're going to need the template. There will be a link below this video to get that. You're going to print 2 pages, and then you're going to cut them apart and tape them together to make the template. When you print them, make sure that that 1-inch square is actually 1 inch so that you're getting the correct size for your bib. And I've set this design up to be about a 6 to 12-month-old size, because that's going to work with most babies for Halloween. If you want something very specific to the size that you like, just make a template from a bib whose size you love. Then, because we're going to be sewing a lot of strips of fabric onto the base of our bib, I'm going to be adding a light interfacing, and I'm using this Pellon 845 Designer's Light Interfacing. It works great just to stabilize this fabric as we sew other things on. Next, we need a kitchen towel. This is just one that I got at Walmart. I think it was a 3-pack. It works great. I like using towels on the back of baby bibs because then you can flip it and it's a bit more absorbent than just a cotton fabric is going to be. Then another one of my favorites, I'm going to be using this heat erasable pen. Then we're going to get a little scrap of fabric. We're going to cut 2 black eyes, about an inch circle, or you can just wing it and do whatever shape you want. Black and white thread, rotary cutter, ruler. We're going to need some fabric scissors. Oh, these are my fabric scissors. These are my pinking shears. I'm going to fess up. I really don't like cutting curves, like having to go back in with little scissors and clip, 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 clipping or notching. It's like one of the worst things in the sewing process to me, but I have discovered that if you use pinking shears, it gets the job done, it turns great, and it's a lot less effort. You'll notice both of these scissors are this way. From Fiskars, I love the way this works versus a more traditional scissor where you're doing this with your thumb. I just find these to be a lot easier on my thumb and my hand, and we do enough things with our thumbs that when we can get a little bit easier, do it. Those are your supplies that you're going to need. So let's get started. You've made your template. We're going to cut a piece of fabric and a piece of interfacing that is slightly smaller, and you're going to just follow the manufacturer's instructions and press that onto the fabric. We want to make sure that we sew our strips on the front and not the interfacing side. So we're going to fold this in half. Don't press it, just kind of make sure it's folded so that you can place your pattern on the fold there. And then we are going to be taking our pen, and I'm just going to do some little dashes, or you can fully trace it. I don't know why I'm doing little dashes. We will be cutting on here later. And the reason I'm not cutting this out is because I find it a lot easier to sew all the mummy strips on the fabric and cut it at the end so that it's nice and even, and you're not dealing with a bunch of ends and trying to get it to line up now. Then you're just going to flip your pattern and you're going to draw the opposite side. So we're basically drawing this baby bib on this fabric before we take it to the sewing machine. There we have it. Now we're going to set that aside for a minute, and then we're going to take our fabric. And one thing I love about this too is because we're dealing with a mummy, you want some frayed edges. So I always use the selvage too. Waste not, want not. Now I'm going to cut strips, 10 to 12 strips, and I'm going to vary the width. I'm going to go anywhere from 1 to 1.5 inches wide. I don't want them to be completely consistent because, you know, it's a mummy and he's supposed to look a little tattered and worn. Got a nice pile of strips. That's going to be good. And now I'm going to take the black fabric, and on the template, there is a circle you can use as a guide. But again, this is a mummy. He's not going to be perfect. So I just fold this black piece in half, and then I just take my fabric scissors and I just kind of cut what feels like a circle. We have our bib drawn on white fabric. We have strips of fabric. We have eyes and we have button eyes. So it is time to head to the sewing machine and start having some fun. The first thing you're going to do before adding any of these strips is decide where you want the eyes on your bib. And I usually kind of center them. You could do them at an angle, but you can see here's the top line, and there will be a 1/4 inch seam. So don't put it too close to the line that you drew on there. Just have it down a little bit. So we're just going to place them like that. And then we're going to take our first strip, and this is all going to be raw edge, because after you sew it together, you're going to put it in the wash and you're going to let it fray. So you don't want to sew right on the edge. You don't want to zigzag because we want this to look like a tattered mummy. So we're going to sew maybe 1/8 of an inch from that edge, and we want the eyes to be tucked under. So this is how we're going to get the bottom of the eyes attached to the bib. So I'm simply going to sew down both long sides of this piece of fabric. So we have our eyes are placed and our first strip down, and now you're just going to keep adding strips at different angles. It is truly just a random project. You're going to just keep sewing these on. I usually sew them to about here. I don't sew them all the way up to the top because then it gets a little bit thick for attaching it. Once you get a few strips on, you're going to want to put one that's going to go behind the eyes. So you can pin these back, but what I usually do is I just place my strip and then I will just pull it back with my finger as I get to it. You can do some smaller strips, so I'm just going to cut this one and use it on the other side as you get to the skinnier part of the bib. And just keep it going at odd angles so it looks like he was just wrapped up perfectly when mummified. Now I've changed to black thread and we're going to tack down the rest of the eyes by just sewing around it. You can just use a straight foot or you can do free motion. I'm just leaving this 1/4 inch foot in that I've already had in. And then we will just change that when we do the button next. I switched back to white thread and now we have the button foot on, and we're going to sew these button eyeballs on here. So since this button's so small, both sides of this foot are not going to grab it. So what I'm going to do is with my hand, I'm going to slowly lower the needle, make sure it is going into that hole. Then I'm going to put the foot down. All right, so that's going to hit both holes. So now I'm going to use the presser foot. So my next button won't take as long because I know that I have the width set right for the holes in the button. And I'm going to make these eyes kind of off center just to make him a little bit more crazy looking. I do still lower the needle by moving the dial with my hand, so it's going super, super slow. And then I always make sure the second one's going to go in before using my presser foot. He's coming together. Looks like a little bit of a mess, but I promise it's going to be the cutest bib. Now you can still see some of the lines that we drew, but some are covered with the mummy tape. So you can either just eyeball it and connect the dots basically, or you can put your template back down, line up the lines that you can see, and then trace along there so that you know where you're going to be cutting. Then you're going to take your fabric scissors and you're going to cut along the lines to create the shape of the baby bib. We're going to set this aside for a minute and we're going to open up our towel. Make sure you have pre-washed everything so that it will have shrunk because bibs get washed a lot. Now we're going to place our mummy face down on the towel. I'm going to trim the towel so there's not a lot of extra on the ends, but I'm not going to cut it to size. Now we're going to pin the bib down and then we're going to sew around with a 1/4 inch seam before we cut this. If you have pinking shears, it's time to grab them now. If you don't, I'm going to show you how to clip these corners without pinking shears. Then we're going to finish them with the pinking shears because that's my favorite. So if you don't have them, you're going to use regular fabric scissors and you're going to cut right along the edge of the white. You're going to go in a little bit closer to your stitch line on these really tight curves. And then I like to take a smaller pair of scissors and then you're just going to do little cuts, and you do need to do them kind of close together on these really tight curves, but do not cut your stitch line. Super important. That's going to be important with the pinking shears as well, but basically this is what you're going to do. You can also do notches where you're cutting out a triangle of fabric, which is what we're going to be doing with the pinking shears. So this is what you do if you are just using regular scissors. I find it is a lot harder on my thumb and my hand. So let's play with the pinking shears. One thing to note is that we sewed a lot of strips on here and some of them overlapped. So some of these areas are rather thick. So you're going to need to go slow with your pinking shears to not only avoid cutting your stitch line, but also to make sure you can get through all of those layers. And you certainly don't want to press down too hard and go straight into your bib. So just go really slowly and carefully. We're going to do this all the way around the bib. So this part's harder because it's so curved, but now we're getting into the part where it is thicker because it's multiple layers of fabric. So it's just a little bit harder to squeeze, but it works. Just, again, go slow. Oh, right here I have way too many overlapped. Ooh. When you get up to where you left it open for turning, you want to go way out and just go parallel to where the fabric is because you need to have enough that you're going to be able to fold that in. So now we just need to turn this right side out. So now I'm going to take this to my ironing board and I'm going to iron this so that we have a nice smooth area to top stitch and just double catch all of that turning part. And then we're going to be folding this part under so the curve looks good, and we will catch this open end. Now we're just going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch all the way around to just double catch that seam that we had. And you also want to do a longer stitch length because it's going to be very thick. So longer stitch length, so slow, and we are almost done. Now the next step and last step is to do your closure. I prefer Velcro because it's really easy to attach when you're sewing it together, and it's really easy to get on and off of baby when you're reaching around their head. So I just have about a 1-inch piece of both the hook and the loop. And I always put the loop on the part that is going to be on the back of the bib, because if you ever didn't have it lined up right, you want the soft part touching baby's skin, so you want the hook on the front of the bib. So I'm going to start by attaching the loop to the back, and then we will figure out exactly where those hooks go and attach that as well. So we have the loop on there, so I'm going to turn this over, and then I'm going to just kind of line the hook up without having it attach and place that. So we have pretty much an idea of where we want that, and then we're just going to sew that on. So our sewing is done. Now you're just going to want to run that through the wash and get it nice and mummified.
Grab your Halloween fabric scraps, because today I'm going to show you how easy it is to make the perfect size, simple drawstring bag for a regular size candy bar. These would be great for holiday parties, to make for your grandkids, or if you're really generous and have a lot of sewing to do, you can make these for all the little trick-or-treaters that come to your door. You're going to need 2 pieces of fabric. They can be directional or non-directional. If it's directional, just make sure you have them going in the same direction and do your drawstring at the top so you don't have upside down bags when you're done. Then you're going to need 2 pieces of drawstring. I'm just using thin ribbon, 15 inches long each, a safety pin to put the drawstrings in when we're done, pinking shears. These are my favorite, not only for curves, but they're fantastic for making these bags without having to do French seams and keeping everything from fraying. Finally, I'm going to be using my Cricut mini press. It doesn't heat up as much as a regular size iron, and it's really easy to do small pressing projects like we're going to do on the bag. So I will show you that later. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your 2 pieces of fabric and place them right sides together. And again, if it's directional fabric, make sure they are going in the same direction and not one upside down and one right side up. I'm going to place these on the grid of my cutting mat so that I can easily measure down 2 inches and make a mark on either side. Now you can clip or pin. I'm just going to put 3 quick clips in here to make sure that this stays lined up when I move it and we start sewing. I'm going to sew from the marks I made 2 inches down one side, across the bottom, and up the other side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now normally I do a 1/4 inch, but we want a 1/2 inch seam allowance for this so we have enough room to work on the drawstring channel, which I will show you in a minute. Now I'm going to take small scissors and I'm just going to trim at that 2 inch mark from the raw edge just to where I sewed, but don't clip your stitching. So now we have made a little part that is going to be the flap. We're going to press that in a minute. But first, we are going to take the pinking shears and trim close to these stitch lines. This is going to prevent the bag from fraying so that you can use it year after year, or the recipients can use it as a cute little Halloween storage bag, reuse it as a gift bag, etc. These are so fast to whip up with your scraps, you might as well just make a bunch at once. So we have pinking sheared along the stitch lines, and we have these little tabs. Now let me grab my ironing board. Okay, and I have my little mini press. You can use a regular iron, a small iron, something like this, whatever you want. And the first thing we are going to do is we are going to press all 4 of these tabs. We're going to press that 1/4 inch and then another 1/4 inch so that that raw edge is going to be tucked under. And I am going to use my quilter's clapper. This is just a wonderful piece of unfinished wood, really easy to hold. And part of the reason I am using it on this is when you put the wood down, after you have pressed. It helps to really crease that. And more importantly, at least in my opinion for this project, is it takes the heat out of the fabric. So then I don't end up burning my fingers as I'm doing these double folds. So we've done that side. Now I'm just going to turn it over and do the same thing for these two tabs. And you could make it simpler by folding and folding and just pressing once. That will make this process even faster. And once you make one of these, they're so simple, you can probably whip up a bag in less than 5 minutes. Okay, so all 4 of those are pressed. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're just going to stitch all 4 of these, and then we will make our drawstring channel. So when you're sewing these channels, you want to make sure you're not sewing both of them. So you're just going to fold one down and then make sure you're about 1/8 of an inch from that edge to make sure you are actually sewing that closed. And then make sure you stop and double back before you get to this folded down section. You do not want to sew all the way to this next side. Our next step is to press this top section into the drawstring channel. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold down about 1/4 inch and press. And then you're going to fold that down again and have that folded edge just over where this line is. So where your 2-inch mark was and where your pinking shear part starts. So you're going to fold that down so you have about 1/2 inch channel. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to take this back to the sewing machine. We're going to sew across here on each side. Just like when we sewed the edges, we want to make sure we're not catching the opposite side of this drawstring. So I'm just going to fold that back and I'm going to sew straight across. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now we're going to turn this right side out. I'm just going to push the corners out with my fingers. And all that's left is to add the drawstrings. I'm just going to take a safety pin, pin that on one side of the first ribbon, and you can start on either side. You're going to thread it through, pull it out, and then send it back the other direction. When you get that through, you're just going to tie the ribbon into a little knot. And then you're going to do the same thing with the other piece, but this time you're going to start on the side where you just have the loop and not where you have the knot, because you want your strings to be on the opposite sides of this drawstring bag when it's all done. So now all you need is your candy. Put that in there, pull the drawstring, and it is ready to go. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these cute Halloween ghosts using soft fabric from the Dollar Tree in the automotive aisle. So really excited about it. It is an easy project. You can get a free pattern with the templates that you can download. Look in the link below the video to find that. But before we get started, I want to show you this printer. Call me old school. I've always had a large printer in my home for work and other things, but more and more I'm hearing about how people don't have printers. Oh, I can't print that. I don't have a printer. They're doing everything digitally. So if that is you, but you occasionally want to print a pattern or something else, you could look at a thermal printer. Look at how small this thing is. It's amazing. So the people from Munvin, I hope I'm saying that right, gave me this to try. So I'm going to show you how it works. And I did use it with this project. And you can also find a link to find this below the video. So make sure you take a look at that. And there will be a promotional code too, because they want you to get a deal if you learn about it from this video. So let's take a look at this. It is a thermal printer, which basically means it's like a cash register receipt, right? A lot of people think they don't know what thermal printers are, but you actually do. So it isn't super long-term paper. It lasts for 3 years and you don't want to put a ton of heat on it. So let me show you. There's just these little buttons on the side. It took me a minute to figure out how to load this, so I'm going to do that. You want to open it up, and it does come with a roll of paper in here. This moves to hold or release that. You want to take that out, unless you're going to use the rolled paper. I am not at this point. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to turn it on. It comes with a cord, a USB-C, so you charge it. So you don't have to have it plugged in when you're using it. I think this is a fantastic option if you like to travel, go to retreats. You can have all of your patterns and everything on your phone, or maybe in a Google Drive or something. Download them to the phone, use the app, and print right from there. So cool. So I am going to be using this letter size paper, and it is folded. The plain side is the front. The side with the black is the back. On one side of this, there is metal with the little cutting jiggy things, kind of like on saran wrap. So that is going to come out that side. So if you're using the roll, then you can use that to tear. With this letter paper, it's already perforated, so that's not as important. But I'm just going to feed the paper into this side. And it catches it, and you'll see it's getting it all lined up and ready for me. And then when that turns green, it is good to go. Now I'm going to show you how this app works. But this is an app called Smart Fox, and you can pick all different kinds of things, and it's a free app. You can, print a document, do a tattoo print, scan and print, do labels, invoices, websites. So we're going to do document. It's connecting to my printer. And then you can see there's all different kinds of documents that you can connect to. I'm going to be doing the free sample, and you can get this off my website. Look for the link below. And then I'm going to scroll down, and you can print all of the directions, or you can just print the templates. So I'm going to click the print button. And then here you're going to choose the direction, and this is landscape. Paper type, you decide if you're doing roll or folded. Then I don't want to print every page. So here I'm going to put 4 to 5. And then I'm just going to double check before I hit print. So landscape, print normal. It prints really, really well. And I'm just going to hit print. It's going to confirm, hit print now. And now we shall just watch the magic happen. It's nice and quiet. And I was actually really impressed and amazed at how nice and dark that is. And that's it. How easy is that? And then to take the paper out, you're just going to open it back up, and then you can just slide that back out, close that, push the button to turn it back off. I'm glad that they let me try that and share that with you. Now let us move on to our tutorial so we can use these templates and make some stuffed ghosts for Halloween. Now let's look at our supplies. This looks like a big old mess and like you need a lot, but it's really not as complicated as it appears. This is the little ghost that we are going to make. I'm going to use orange for the banners this time instead of the pink. Then you need fabric scissors, and I like to use pinking shears, but you do not need them. If you don't have pinking shears, I would recommend a small pair of scissors like this for clipping the curves and here when you're going, before you turn that right side out. Then you're going to need felt or scraps of felt, and you can get a free PDF that shows you the sizes of everything that you need so that you can make this cute little banner and the eyes. Optional embroidery thread if you want to sew on a mouth. This one I just did with a pen to see how it looked. We're going to do the next one a little bit differently. Then I'm going to use this rickrack for the banner, just like I did with this one. I think it's super cute. Stuffing, whatever your preference is. I am using the Polyfill Crafter's Choice from Fairfield World. Then I wanted to make him nice and soft. So I went to the Dollar Tree and I got this microfiber cloth. It is 16 by 24. And I'm going to be able to get my whole ghost out of this, possibly 2. We shall see when we get to cutting. You don't have to use this. You could use a towel if you want him to have a different texture. You can obviously use white cotton, whatever you want. But I just thought this would be a little bit fun. I will say I did sew with it once. It is very fuzzy. You're definitely going to want to clean your machine when you're done with this project and your workspace, but I think it is worth it. Then some straight pins. Needle and thread for sewing it closed. I'm going to show you a trick with a stapler that I came up with that I'm pretty pleased with myself about, and I'm sure you're just dying to know about that, so let's get into it. So I'm going to take my template. We'll start with this one, which has the designs for the banner and the letters, and then also the eyes. This is a mouth if you just wanted to trace that on, and you could embroider it. You can just draw one on. I'm actually going to cut a third black oval and have a big ghost mouth. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this template apart because I know these are going to be orange, and I am using paper scissors, not my fabric scissors. I know they cut the paper when we're cutting out the pieces, but If I'm only cutting paper, I use my paper scissors. You can either use a big piece of felt or you can grab some scraps. I had some scraps of black, so I'm going to use that. And this is where my stapler comes in. Because these are pretty hard to pin, like you wouldn't be able to pin them and cut without cutting through a pin, so that's not going to work. Using glue, which I sometimes do, like put glue on the back and put it onto fabric so it stays temporarily while you cut, it doesn't work on the felt. I did try that. So I decided to try stapling it. So I'm just going to put 2 staples, although you do have to cut this into individual pieces if you're going to use my little staple method. Have you ever tried this before? I don't know. I couldn't sleep the other night and I just started thinking, how can I get these to stay better? Because you can also cut them without it, but the paper is going to slide around a little bit more. But this stapling works great. And I love this thermal paper because it is nice and thin. It's easier to cut. It's also super portable. Okay, so I have stapled those on. Now I am going to cut them out. I do use smaller scissors when I'm cutting out these center parts. And what I do is I fold that a little bit and then I will clip to get a hole in the center. In case you haven't cut out many things like this before, this is how I do it. And then I'm going to just hold it together, but it is staying pretty nicely with these staples. We have our O cut out, but it has staples. So now I'm just going to take tweezers and I'm going to bend the back of the staple back up. And once you have that bent back up, you can just pull it right out. Just make sure you don't poke it into your finger when you're bending that second side. And then if you need to do any maintenance, see there's a little funny little piece there. You can just trim up your letters. Make sure that shape is nice. And do that for all 3 letters. Didn't do the best job on that B, but it'll just look a little bit spooky. Now I'm going to cut these banners out of the orange, and I'm going to line this line up with this edge, this line up with this edge. That's just 2 cuts I'm not going to have to make. I am going to pin those. This could be a fun project to do with kids or scouts, because with felt especially, you can decide if you want to sew things together or you can also use glue. So this banner could be completely glued together. You could even have the kids hand stitch the ghost instead of sewing it. So it could be an easy project like that. But I'm going to show you how to put this together with your sewing machine. Okay, so now we have our banners. You're going to want to put your letters down a little bit. Going to want to spell correctly. And you're going to put it down a little bit because if you're going to use rickrack, I'm going to sew mine across the top. If you want to sew it behind, you can center the letters more. But I think it's really fun when it goes over the top like that. So just think about that before you sew these on. I'm just going to sew a single stitch right around these letters. I have black thread in both the top and the bottom, and I'm using a pretty small stitch. I'm going to pull up this bobbin thread so that I don't get a big knot on the back. If you've never seen this, you basically put your needle down while holding on to the top thread and then lift it, and that pulls your bobbin thread up. Then you're going to grab both, put them under your foot, and hold them back. Then you can go forward a few stitches and then backwards to knot your thread, and you're not going to have that bird's nest that you sometimes get on the bottom if you don't do that. Now, my machine also has function where I can push a button, and when I stop, my foot is going to stay up. I know, I'm so spoiled, but I love that about it. I'm using a Janome M7 Continental. So then whenever I want to pivot, it's just going to go up for me. And because I'm sewing black on black felt, you really will not see this thread at all. So I'm not being super careful about making sure it's always in the middle. This is really just to get it to stay on. Now you could be fancier. You could do a white stitch and make the letters, or you could use a metallic, but we're just going for quick, cute, and done here today. Sometimes I can't grab that really well without poking myself, so I always keep tweezers by my machine to grab that bobbin thread. So we have our BOO done. We can stick this on the banner later, or we can do it now. I'm going to just do it now. I'm going to fold this in half, find the center, and the center is going to go on the center of that center O. Lots of centers. And you can put this banner together with anything. You could put ribbon, you could use string, cording. For smaller projects like this, I like to just look around and see what I have and decide which of those things I want to use instead of running out and buying something new, but totally up to you and depends on what you have in your stash. Now we need to make the eyes. I'm going to do a third one. And if you want to do the mouth, just reuse one of the eyes, the eye templates after you cut it out the first time. Now we are going to work on the ghost. It's a great piece of fabric for $1.25. I'm going to grab my pattern and I'm going to put it pretty close to this edge, but you don't want it on the stitched edge. And I'm going to pin him down. Pinned on, we are just going to cut that out. And keep your fabric flat on your table as much as possible. It is going to give you a much more accurate cut. Because if you start picking it up and cutting, your fabric is more likely to move. It is a little bit harder on some of these curves, but the closer to flat on your table that you can stay, the more accurate your pieces are going to be. Okay, we'll take the pins off, and then let's see if we can do two of these guys from that one cloth. You can. What a deal. The next thing you need to do is you need to decide what direction you want your ghost facing. So in my first one, I have him looking off to the right, but you could just as easily put the eyes on the other side. So I'm going to do that for this one so they can be like they're ghosts in love looking at each other. So I'm just going to flip that over and then just look at the photo on the free PDF to get a feel for where you want to put your eyes. You don't want them too low where they're going to get in the way of your banner. And then also remember, you're going to be sewing with a 1/2 inch seam. So don't put them too close to the top because we don't want them to get sewn into that seam. And now it is time to sew down our ghost eyes and mouth. Now, when I did the last one, I didn't put anything underneath this. And I will tell you, it didn't move really well because it's so fluffy and fuzzy on the bottom that the feed dogs had a hard time really moving it around. So this time, I'm just going to take a little scrap of white cotton fabric and put that behind it because you're not going to see it once we get that stuffed. But it's going to make it move better in my machine. And it's also going to hopefully make there be a little bit less fluff going into the bottom of my machine, although you'll get plenty when we sew this ghost back together. So we're just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to do a very short, actually I'm going to do like 1.2, very short stitch all the way around these eyes to tack them down. If you want to, like if you like to embroider, you could embroider the eyes on, you could embroider around the edges, but again, I'm just going for quick and done here. You could also use buttons, Google eyes, all kinds of things. This could also be really cool. You could embroider, if you have an embroidery machine or you want to embroider by hand, you could embroider a child's name or initial on the back of the ghost. So it's like a stuffed animal toy for them versus a decoration. So many ways you can dress this up. Now our ghost eyes are embroidered on, and these little are just white fuzzies from the towel that come off. I like it with the mouth. Now, as I said, it moved a little bit. You can leave this on, or you can just trim off the excess white. So it's pretty much just behind where you sewed those eyes on. Totally up to you. All right, let's go back to the workstation and we will get him pinned together. Our next step is to pin the ghost together. You'll notice I made him a little flat on the bottom so that he will stand up kind of nicely. He doesn't stand up on his own. Maybe if you put something really heavy in the bottom, but he leans against things really nicely. So you're just going to match these edges and pin all the way around. And then I always like to put 2 pins where I need to stop because sometimes you just get on a roll and you're sewing along and You're just so happy. And then you end up sewing the whole thing together. And then you got to get your seam ripper out and do all that. So I like to put 2 pins so I know where to stop. We are going to sew around this with a short stitch because we do have quite a few curves. And we're going to want to turn it right side out to get these hands so that they can hold that banner. We don't want to lose the back of the ghost's tail. I don't know, is that what you call that? What do you call that? So use a shorter stitch, maybe a 1.5, 1.4. Before we turn our ghost right side out, we need to clip these curves and definitely these little points by the arms so that it's going to turn and give us a nice shape. And I like to do that with a combination of small scissors and pinking shears. But if you don't have pinking shears, you're totally fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the small scissors and I'm going to snip into the inside corners and kind of cut out some of that bulk. Don't clip your stitches. So I'm going to do that on both sides here. Most of the rest with pinking shears. So the reason I love pinking shears for curves is, again, it's fast. So you're just going to use the pinking shears and stay on the outside of the stitching. Don't cut your stitching, but you're just going to cut some of this extra bulk out. I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this guy because I know, especially with this fluffy fabric, it doesn't always stay a 1/2 inch. So you just want to get some of this extra bulk out. When you turn it, you're not going to have all of the fabric that's past the stitching pulling and not giving you a nice curve. I don't trim where I left it open because I want to have enough fabric that I can turn under and hand stitch closed once we stuff it. All right, so try and get most of the fuzz off of your cutting mat or your workspace. Now we're just going to turn it right side out. Now, if you do decide to make this for a child, make sure you don't have small parts that could come off. All the safety things, just remember that. I'm just going to push these hands out with my fingers for now, kind of get that shape out as best as I can. Then I'm going to use this little turning tool. It's not a super point on there. If you don't have one, chopsticks work great for this, but I'm just going to gently push and it will help get the points out better than with my fingers. But you want to do it slowly and gently so that you don't push through your stitching. I mean, if you do push through your stitching, you'll live. You can just hand stitch it closed, but it's just better not to. You can also use it to run along this head curve, get that curve pushed out a little bit better. Now comes the stuffing. If you've never stuffed anything like this before, you want to start with small pieces, kind of roll it up, and you want to put it in the tiny spots. I'm going to make sure these hands are a nice shape and thickness that you like before you start really going to town on the body. Okay, so the small sections are done. Now I'm going to do the head. So you just want to stuff him so he's as fat or skinny as you want. Kind of keep pushing to get this curve the way you like it. And you want to make it pretty stuffed on the bottom so you don't end up with a big air pocket when you stitch that together. But you'll see now we left this bottom section a little bit longer so that we can fold that in. And you can use the pins, or I'm going to clip this to hold that so that it's folded the way I want it to be as I hand stitch that closed. And then once you stitch that closed, you can just decide exactly how you want this to be hanging. You can have it hang down and curve a little bit more. You can have that come behind. I just do a little hand stitch with black thread on either side of this rickrack, and I let this kind of float around. Look how cute he turned out. They're such a cute little pair, ready to decorate for Halloween. Of course, you can make the faces your own, play with the colors. You could do smaller banners and put someone's name. You could embroider a name or an initial on the back. You could use heat transfer vinyl and put somebody's name on the back if you're making these as little trick-or-treat gifts. So many ways to use these. I would love to know in the comments what you think, who you're going to make them for, and if you're going to personalize them in any way. Now, one thing to know about this paper is there's no ink involved. It's done by using heat onto the paper. And because of that, there's some things that you need to remember if you're going to be printing and storing things. Number one, it's not going to last forever. This, as it says on here, it's going to last for about 3 years, assuming you follow these conditions. So assuming you're keeping it inside in a temperature less than 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Avoid direct sunlight, fluorescent, and similar UV light sources. So as long as you put it in the packaging, or if it's a roll, keep it in your machine, it's going to store pretty well as long as it's not too hot. Now, the paper itself, if it gets too hot, it will yellow over time. It will turn black if it gets really, really hot. So let's just test that and see what happens like if we iron on it. I'm not sure why we need to iron on it, but because I have all these details, I'm just super curious. I'm told it's going to turn yellow at about 118 degrees Fahrenheit or 48 degrees Celsius. So put it in the sun in Phoenix in the summer, this thing's going to turn yellow. Let's see. I just turned this on, so it's not totally heat. Oh, it's hot. Look at that. So this must be over 158 degrees. Okay, that's just kind of fun, actually. No ironing your thermal paper unless you just want it to turn completely black. Look, Mom, science. All right, so that's what happens if you hit it with an iron. You can make your own block paper.
Let's make a fabric pumpkin. It is so easy. So the first thing you're going to do is get my template. You can download the templates for free, or I do have a full pattern with written directions and lots of pictures in my Etsy shop. It comes with 2 sizes. We're going to do the smaller. And because this is directional fabric, it's really, really important to make sure the top of your fabric is lined up with the bigger part, because this is a part you're going to stuff. If you were to cut it this way, all your ghosts are going to be upside down and you're not going to be as happy with your pumpkin. Cut a few strips slightly wider than the template so that I can pile this, because we need to make 8 of these. Now this is 3 inches wide by 8 inches high. And for this one, I am going to make it all with the same fabric. But one thing I love about this pattern, because you're sewing it together, is you can make it look super scrappy. The other ones I've done, I've used 2 different ones, so they alternate. You could also, if you want it to be really scrappy looking, you could make it with 8 different fabric scraps. So each section of your pumpkin would have a different pattern. Okay, and I am going to cut these all at once. I'm going to pin through, and I know this is a lot to cut at once, but this is a stuffed project. So if it doesn't get cut absolutely perfectly, it's okay. So what kind of fabrics do you think you'll use? Will you use 8 of the same, 2 different fabrics and 4 pieces of each, or will you go wild and make it super scrappy with 8 different fabrics? Let me know in the comments what you're thinking. Now we're going to take our 8 pieces that is going to create our pumpkin, and we're going to sew them together, right sides together. Now there's 2 ways to do this. You can sew the first 2 and then just keep adding 1 until you get all 8 together and then do the final one. But I like to do it in pairs of 2 and then put them together, because that way I don't have to pin it when I'm doing them flat. But if you want to pin it, by all means, please do. And it doesn't matter if you start from the top edge or this edge, but what does matter is to backstitch at both ends. You don't want this to pop open after it is sewn together. So let's get this done. If you do them in sets of 2, you can also daisy chain them so that you don't have to totally take it out of your sewing machine with each one. If you're using more than 1 color fabric, make sure you are paying attention to which 2 you're putting together. So when I did 2 different fabrics, I would do 2 sets of each matching and then put them together in the order that I wanted when I sewed all 8 together. Now we are going to have 4 sets of 2. So we're going to cut those apart. And because I'm using 1 fabric, it's super easy. It doesn't matter what goes with what. So we're going to open that. And once they are sewn like this, I do pin or clip them together just to make sure they stay lined up. So I'm going to take these 2 sets. I'm just going to line up this one edge. And the most important one is this bottom one. You want to line up these 2 seams and that edge. All right, so we're going to repeat that, and we're going to get all these sections put together. As you get to that end, when you're adding more, make sure you don't sew onto this piece that is open. Don't go past that seam. When you hit the last seam, that's where you want to back up. Okay, when you get down here, remember you're matching this seam. This is the one we're sewing onto the rest. This seam with the rest, but you want to make sure you keep this part, this open side, out of that clump. You're going to go right there, and then you're going to sew only to that seam line and back up there. Don't go over it and catch anything else. Now, before you leave your sewing machine, you're going to turn this right side out and just double check that the bottom is nice and secure. So you don't even have to turn it all the way. Just get it so that that inside, and you can see that's nicely stitched together. It's not really pulling. If you feel like it's a little loose and open, just have a thread. You can come back and just sew across the bottom with a 1/4 inch stitch, just to reinforce that bottom if you want to. But if you did double back at each time you hit the bottom and you didn't go over the other ones, you should be good to go. Now we're going to turn our pumpkin shape right side out. So you'll notice it looks kind of oblong, but once we stuff it, it's going to be a great pumpkin shape. So I'm going to take some polyfill, or you can use any kind of fluffy stuffing that you prefer. And I'm just going to take little pieces at a time, starting in the bottom and then just kind of pushing it out. You want to put it in and make sure that you don't get big air bubbles, because then it's not going to have a great shape for you. So you just keep shoving the stuffing in. All right, so we're getting to a pretty good spot. You want it to be firm but still smushable. So then you just want to start going around and making sure it's filled in nicely in all these different spots. Now we have a big hole in the middle, so we need to add a little bit more. Just kind of pushing and moving it to a shape that you like. Now you don't want to overstuff it, because we still need to pull all of this in tight to the center. Now we're going to gather the top to close that up. So what I've done is I've grabbed some thread from the sewing machine and just doubled it up, put a knot, and left a tail 5 or 6 inches long. So I'm going to start with the needle under the fabric about a 1/2 inch from the raw edge. And I'm going to pull that. And then I'm going to do 2 little loops just to secure that, because if that knot isn't quite big enough, when you start pulling, it's going to pop and it's going to get messed up. Ask me how I know. This little pumpkin, I've done a bunch of these. This one is just giving me grief. Okay, so this is my new method. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to do some pretty big stitches. If you do them too small, it'll be really hard to pull together. So you want them quite large. I'm going to go all the way around. Now, because this has been giving me such grief in the pulling and tying off the end, and I decided it would be easier if I had another person here to help me hold it, but I don't, I have come up with a plan. So now we're back to the end thread. Leave your needle on. I'm going to take some big quilting safety pins. I'm going to squeeze this in, and I am going to do a couple big safety pin chunks to help keep this fabric already in, so it's not having to pull quite as much with the thread, and it'll be easier to pull and tie it off. Make sure your safety pins are lower than where your stitching is. You don't want them on or above the stitching. See, so now it's not as tight, and don't worry about how it looks, because once we take those pins out, it'll be fine. So now we have our end, and we're just going to pull the needle. And if you're going to use the felt stem, you're just going to pull it all the way closed so you can't see the stuffing if at all possible. But if you want to use a stick or a dowel rod or a cinnamon stick, you're going to put that in the center right now, and we're going to gather around it. And just be careful. It's probably better to pull on the needle than on the thread, because I don't want anyone to end up cutting their hand on this thread. Oh yeah, those safety pins helped a lot. So when you get it tightened up like that, sew a couple stitches. You can hold it and tie this in a knot. That would be ideal. And then I'm going to throw a few more stitches in there. You might want to use a thread that matches. I mean, this does match the ghost, but that matches your pumpkin, because if any of them show, most will be covered by the leaf, but if any of them show, it'll kind of match. Okay, whoo! we did it. I'm going to cut that end off. I'm not cutting off the end with the needle yet. I'm going to take these pins out. Like I said, I have done like 5 of these, and this one is the most difficult one, I swear, because I'm trying to film it. But this will help you if you get into struggles. So now I'm just going to do a few more little stitches across and around that cinnamon stick to just really secure this. So now if you need to, you can rearrange just kind of mush the stuffing around so that you get a shape that you like. And you can leave it just like this. Or you can add embroidery floss to your seam lines to really make it tuck and accentuate the sections of the pumpkin. So let's do that. Black embroidery floss, a little more than twice as long as one of the seam lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this needle, I'm going to find one of these seam lines, and I'm going to poke this straight through the pumpkin. You want to get it at the seam line, and then you want to figure out how to poke it to be at the seam line down here too. So you might have to just keep poking and pushing down to get the tip of it. Pull that through, and then you're going to take that embroidery floss and you're going to make sure it's running along the seam line. And then you're just going to tie it, and see how when you go to tie it, you can pull it, and you can pull it just a little bit or more, and it's going to affect how much that's going to buckle. Tie that at the bottom. So you're going to do that for all 8. So it does end up being a little bit messy looking at the bottom, but you can just cut out a circle of felt and hot glue that on at the end so that it looks nice and finished. These 2 are both the larger ones, and you'll notice that when you do the thread to accentuate those lines, it does make your pumpkin a little bit shorter and wider, but it's kind of fun to have a combination of those if you're putting them in a group. So now we have our pumpkin sewn together, we have our stem. If we hadn't done that, we would be hand stitching this on there now. So now all we need to do is attach our leaf. You could do 1 or 2, and our vine. To make your leaf, you're just going to take a piece of felt, and I've decided to go with a softer kind of olive green. You can also do a bright green, or I mean, you could do, because I'm doing a Halloween pumpkin, you could do black, you could do purple, you could get fancy, but I don't have those colors. So I'm just going to go with this and have it match my other pumpkins. Because this is a much smaller shape with a little more intricate shape, I'm going to use small fabric scissors and just trim around. And again, nobody's going to know exactly what your pattern looks like. So if it's not cut perfectly, it really doesn't matter. You just want the basic shape. And so that's why I'm not even pinning this. All right, so now we have our leaf. Now the leaf you can do flat, but my intention in making it with this notch is that you're going to put a little bit of glue on the one side, and put that down. And I always strategically place my leaf to cover the most unsightly part of the gathering. Then I'm going to put a little dot on the top, and I'm going to fold that, because that gives your leaf, be careful, hot glue is hot. It gives your leaf a little pinch and a little bit more shape and personality. And then I'm going to put another little spot underneath so that stays on nicely. Okay, now let me show you how I created the vine. I'm going to take a 10-inch piece of twine. You could use yarn, you could use ribbon, whatever you want to use. I just had this thing of twine that I use for other projects. Then I'm going to take some jewelry wire. So you can use any kind of wire. Don't cut wire with your sewing scissors, ever, ever, ever. These are craft scissors, so I'm going to use those. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hot glue the string along the wires. So what I do is I line up the twine and the wire, and then I put a little bit onto the twine and then press the wire on there. And if you can handle touching hot glue, I often press that down so that it kind of goes around the wire. Now I'm just going to move down the twine and do the same thing in a few little spots. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like, and ring that bell so you don't miss a video. I'm going to keep the glue gun turned on because you might need a little bit more glue once you twist it. So this part is going to wrap around the stem, but then we're also just going to twist it gently to make that cool loop so it looks like a little vine coming off of your pumpkin. And sometimes as you twist it, you're going to find the wire and the string move apart a little bit more than you'd like. So you can always add a little bit more glue. And like this one, the wire was showing on top. So I just pushed the string around so that the wire is going to be on the back. So usually I'm adding at least another dot or two, but I really think that this adds just that extra touch to make your fabric pumpkin really pop. You could do it with pipe cleaners as well, but I really like this natural look. This vine you can put on before or after you put on your leaf. I usually put it on before, but I forgot. Okay, so we're going to just twist that wire around the stem, whatever kind of stem you did. And then you can just adjust your vine to be positioned exactly how you want it. Now I'm also going to put a little dot of glue under where the twine meets the pumpkin, just to keep that nice and secure. Look at that, so cute.
All right, so what did you think? Let me know in the comments and let me know which one you're going to try first. And if you have something that you really wish I had done for Halloween, plop that in the comments too. If you're new here, my name is Tara Reed. I am an artist and a fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs, and I love to teach easy sewing projects, quilting for beginners, quilt block tutorials, and also the business side of sewing. So how to sew and sell, whether you want to make money for one specific thing, make a little bit extra a month, or turn it into your business. So be sure to subscribe to my channel. Hit that bell so that YouTube lets you know every time I post something new. And let's just have so much fun together.